Chapter 13 of A Narrative of the Life of Mrs. Mary Jemison. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Narrative of the Life of Mrs. Mary Jemison by James E. Seaver. Chapter 13. A year or two before the death of my husband, Captain H. Jones sent me word that a cousin of mine was then living in Leicester, a few miles from Gardow, by the name of George Jemison, and as he was very poor, thought it advisable for me to go and see him, and take him home to live with me on my land. My Indian friends were pleased to hear that one of my relatives was so near, and also advised me to send for him and his family immediately. I accordingly had him and his family moved into one of my houses in the month of March, 1810. He said that he was my father's brother's son, that his father did not leave Europe till after the French war in America, and that when he did come over, he settled in Pennsylvania, where he died. George had no personal knowledge of my father, but from information was confident that the relationship which he claimed between himself and me actually existed. Although I had never before heard of my father having had but one brother, him who was killed at Fort Necessity, yet I knew that he might have had others, and as the story of George carried with it a probability that it was true, I received him as a kinsman, and treated him with every degree of friendship which his situation demanded. Mrs. Jemison is now confident that George Jemison is not her cousin, and thinks that he claimed the relationship only to gain assistance, but the old gentleman who is now living is certain that his and her father were brothers, as before stated. I found that he was destitute of the means of subsistence, and in debt to the amount of $70, without the ability to pay 1 cent. He had no cow, and finally was completely poor. I paid his debts to the amount of $72, and bought him a cow, for which I paid $20, and a sow and pigs that I paid $8 for. I also paid $16 for pork that I gave him, and furnished him with other provisions and furniture, so that his family was comfortable. As he was destitute of a team, I furnished him with one, and also supplied him with tools for farming. In addition to all this, I let him have one of Thomas's cows for 2 seasons. My only object in mentioning his poverty, and the articles with which I supplied him, is to show how ungrateful a person can be for favors, and how soon a kind benefactor will, to all appearance, be forgotten. Thus furnished with the necessary implements of husbandry, a good team, and as much land as could till, he commenced farming on my flats, and for some time labored well. At length, however, he got an idea that if he could become the owner of a part of my reservation, he could live more easy, and certainly be more rich, and accordingly set himself about laying a plan to obtain it, in the easiest manner possible. I supported Jemison and his family 8 years, and probably should have continued to have done so to this day, had it not been for the occurrence of the following circumstance. When he had lived with me some 6 or 7 years, a friend of mine told me that as Jemison was my cousin, and very poor, I ought to give him a piece of land that he might have something whereon to live that he could call his own. My friend and Jemison were then together at my house, prepared to complete a bargain. I asked how much land he wanted. Jemison said that he should be glad to receive his old field, as he called it, containing about 14 acres, and a new one that contained 26. I observed to them that as I was incapable of transacting business of that nature, I would wait till Mr. Thomas Clute, a neighbor on whom I depended, should return from Albany before I should do anything about it. To this, Jemison replied that if I waited till Mr. Clute returned, he should not get the land at all, and appeared very anxious to have the business closed without delay. On my part, I felt disposed to give him some land, but knowing my ignorance of writing, feared to do it alone, lest they might include as much land as they pleased without my knowledge. They then read the deed which my friend had prepared before he came from home, describing a piece of land by certain bounds that were a specified number of chains and links from each other. Not understanding the length of a chain or link, I described the bounds of a piece of land that I intended Jemison should have, which they said was just the same that the deed contained, and no more. I told them that the deed must not include a lot that was called the Still Place, and they assured me that it did not. Upon this, putting confidence in them both, I signed the deed to George Jemison, containing and conveying to him, as I supposed, 40 acres of land. The deed being completed, they charged me never to mention the bargain which I had then made to any person, because if I did, they said it would spoil the contract. The whole matter was afterwards disclosed, when it was found that that deed, instead of containing only 40 acres, contained 400, and that one half of it actually belonged to my friend, as it had been given to him by Jemison as a reward for his trouble in procuring the deed, in the fraudulent manner above mentioned. My friend, however, by the advice of some well-disposed people, a while afterwards gave up his claim, but Jemison held his till he sold it for a trifle to a gentleman in the south part of Genesee County. Some time after the death of my son Thomas, one of his sons went to Jemison to get the cow that I had let him have 2 years, but Jemison refused to let her go, and struck the boy so violent a blow as to almost kill him. Jemison then run to Jellis Clute, Esquire, to procure a warrant to take the boy, but young King, an Indian chief, went down to Squawky Hill to Esquire Clute's, and settled the affair by Jemison's agreeing never to use that club again. Having satisfactorily found out the friendly disposition of my cousin towards me, I got him off my premises as soon as possible. Chapter 13.